Hello, my name is Lanny Sasser, and I am an Industrial Hazardous Waste Compliance and Enforcement Inspector with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management. And today, I will be covering the most common violations we find while performing compliance evaluation inspections at large quantity generators of hazardous waste. The following slides will detail the top 10 violations that we find most often during our compliance evaluation inspections. Number 10, central accumulation area aisle space and stacking. Aisle space. There must be enough room between rows of hazardous waste for personnel and emergency equipment to freely move between them to respond to a spill or emergency. On the left side of this slide, you will find proper aisle space. On the right side are examples of improper aisle space. Stacking of hazardous waste containers. Hazardous waste containers that are greater than or equal to 55 gallons cannot be stacked more than 2 high. These are examples of proper and improperly stacked hazardous waste containers. On the left side of the slide, you will find properly stacked hazardous waste containers that are greater than or equal to 55 gallons. And on the right side, you will find improperly stacked hazardous waste containers. Number 9, contingency plan. The contingency plan. Each facility must make sure the emergency coordinator and any alternates are up to date. You need to create a quick reference guide for the contingency plan if the plan has been updated since the generator improvement rules were adopted. Send a copy of your contingency plan to local authorities every time a change is made to the plan. You need to retain documentation of any attempts made to send the contingency plan to any agency that might respond to an emergency at your facility. If you need an example of a quick reference guide, one may be found on our website at adm.alabama.gov. Number 8, documenting required inspections. Documenting required inspections. At least weekly, the large quantity generator must inspect the central accumulation area for leaking and deteriorated containers caused by corrosion or other factors. The large quantity generator must record these inspections in an inspection log or summary and keep these records for at least 3 years from the date of the inspection. At a minimum, these records must include the date and time of the inspection, the name of the inspector, a notation of any observations made during the inspection, and the date and nature of any repairs or other remedial actions taken. If your facility stores hazardous waste in tanks, you must inspect at least once each operating day data gathered from any monitoring and leak detection equipment, overfill or spill control equipment, above ground portions of the tank system, or the construction materials and the area immediately surrounding the externally accessible portion of the tank system, including the secondary containment to detect erosion or signs or releases of hazardous waste. These inspections must be documented in the facility's operating record. Number 7, proper security. Proper security. Large quantity generator must prevent the unknowing entry and minimize the possibility for the unauthorized entry of persons or livestock into the central accumulation area. Unless exempt, the large quantity generator must have a 24-hour surveillance system, an artificial or natural barrier which completely surrounds the active portion of the facility, and a means to control entry at all times through the gates or other entrances to the central accumulation area, and a sign with the legend, "Danger, unauthorized personnel keep out," posted at each entrance to the central accumulation area, and at other locations in sufficient numbers to be seen from any approach. This legend must be written in English or any other predominant language in the workplace and must be legible from a distance of 25 feet. Number 6, universal waste requirements. Universal waste requirements. Containers of universal waste must be closed except when adding or removing waste from the container. The containers must be labeled as universal waste, waste, or used. Pesticides must be labeled as universal waste or waste pesticides. An accumulation start date must be on each container of universal waste. This is the date the first piece of universal waste is placed into this container. The generator has 1 year from the accumulation start date to accumulate waste in the container and ship it off-site. Universal waste labeling requirements. Universal waste containers must be labeled as universal waste, or used batteries, lamps, mercury-containing equipment, mercury thermostats, aerosol cans, or pesticides. With the exception of the last category, pesticides will need to be labeled universal waste or waste pesticides. This slide shows proper versus improper universal waste containers. On the left, you will see proper universal waste containers being stored. They're closed, labeled, and dated. On the right, you will see improper universal waste containers. Some of these containers are open and they do not contain a universal waste label or an accumulation start date. Number 5, satellite accumulation requirements. Satellite accumulation requirements. Large quantity generators may accumulate less than or equal to 55 gallons of non-acute hazardous waste and/or less than or equal to 1 quart of liquid acute hazardous waste, or less than or equal to 1 kilogram of solid acute hazardous waste at or near the point of generation and under the control of the operator. The container holding the hazardous waste must be in good condition, compatible with the waste being stored, closed except when adding or removing or consolidating the waste from the container, and marked with the words hazardous waste and an indication of the hazards of the contents of the container. Waste codes may not be used as an indication of the hazard of the contents of your container. This slide illustrates both the correct and incorrect way for the containers to be stored while in satellite accumulation. On the left side of the slide, you will see that all openings on the container are closed, the lid is affixed and tightened, and the container integrity is not compromised by corrosion or structural damage. The pictures on the right side of the slide demonstrate improper satellite accumulation drum closure. Satellite accumulation containers must be labeled with the words hazardous waste and an indication of the hazard of the contents of the container. Waste codes DFP, U, or K are not recognized as an acceptable means of indicating the hazard of the contents on satellite accumulation containers. Acceptable indications labeling, which is pictured on the left side of the screen, include the hazard placards or the words flammable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. On the right side of the screen, at the top, you will see an indication of the proper satellite accumulation labeling, and at the bottom, you have improper satellite accumulation labeling. Number 4, hazardous waste determinations. Any facility located in the state of Alabama must perform a hazardous waste determination on all solid waste they generate and maintain any supporting documents for at least 3 years. This determination must be made at the point of waste generation, and the facility may use generator or process knowledge or analytical results when making this hazardous waste determination. Generator or process knowledge may consist of information about a waste obtained from existing published waste analysis data or studies conducted on the hazardous waste generated by processes identical or similar to those utilized in your facility's operations. Supporting documentation for this type of determination may include safety data sheets, thorough process descriptions, or information on all raw materials used in your facility's processes. You have the ultimate responsibility for any mismanagement of your facility's hazardous waste. Manufacturers and suppliers are only required to list constituents on an SDS that comprises 1% or more of the material. This level of information may not be adequate to determine the constituent levels in the waste to be characterized. For this reason, an SDS should merely be viewed as a supporting document and not the sole means of documenting generator knowledge. Points of waste generation are determined by the facility based on your individual processes. Whenever material is deemed unusable or exits the original process, the facility must determine what is to happen with the material. If it is determined that material is a waste and is to be disposed, the facility must, at this point, determine if the waste is hazardous. This slide gives examples of different points of waste generation at facilities. Piping and instrumentation diagrams are a good way to see points of waste generation in your facility's processes. The red arrow at the bottom of the slide is where the material leaves the process and is determined to be a waste. It is at this point of generation that you, the facility, must determine if your waste is hazardous. Number 3, container requirements. Hazardous waste containers in the central accumulation area must be in good condition, compatible with the waste being stored, closed except when adding, removing, or consolidating waste from the container, marked with the words hazardous waste, and an indication of the hazards of the contents of the container. Remember, hazardous waste codes may not be used as an indication of the hazard of the contents of the container. The containers must not be managed in a manner in which may cause them to leak, not stacked more than 2 high for containers greater than or equal to 55 gallons, and have a completed hazardous waste label with all applicable hazardous waste codes and an accumulation start date. This slide illustrates both the correct and incorrect way for containers to be stored. All openings on the container must be closed, the lids affixed and tightened, and the container integrity must not be compromised by corrosion or structural damage. Proper hazardous waste drum closure is displayed on the left side of the slide, while improper hazardous waste drum closure is on the right. Containers must be labeled with the words hazardous waste and an indication of the hazard of the contents of the container. Waste codes DFP, U, or K are not recognized as an acceptable means of indicating the hazard of the contents. Acceptable indication labeling includes the hazard placards represented here on the left side of the slide, or the words flammable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. On the right side of the slide, you will find proper container labeling versus improper container labeling. This is an example of the hazardous waste label that must be present on a container in the central accumulation area. All areas of the label must be filled out and complete. Number 2, secondary containment requirements. A secondary containment system must be free of cracks or gaps, sufficiently impervious to contain leaks, spills, or accumulated precipitation until the collected material is detected and removed, sloped or otherwise designed and operated to drain and remove liquids resulting from leaks, spills, or precipitation, unless the containers are elevated or are otherwise protected from the contact with the accumulated liquids. Secondary containment system must have sufficient capacity to contain 10% of the volume of containers or the volume of the largest container, whichever is greater. Secondary containment systems for tanks must be able to contain 100% of the volume of the largest tank inside the containment. They must also be able to prevent run-on into the containment system unless the collection system has sufficient excess capacity to contain any run-on which may enter the system. And any spilled or leaked waste must be removed from the sump or collection area in a timely manner, not to exceed 24 hours after detection. Accumulated precipitation must be removed in as timely a manner as necessary to prevent overflow of the collection system. This slide shows proper versus improper central accumulation area secondary containment. On the left side of the slide, you will see proper secondary containment. On the right side are examples of improper secondary containment. This slide shows proper versus improper hazardous waste storage tank secondary containment. On the left side of the screen, you will see examples of proper hazardous waste storage tank secondary containment versus improper hazardous waste storage tank secondary containment on the right side. Number 1, storage of hazardous waste over 90 days. ADEM Administrative Code 335-14-3-.017A states a large quantity generator may accumulate hazardous waste on site for no more than 90 days, unless in compliance with the accumulation time limit extension or F006 accumulation conditions. Thank you for listening to this large quantity generator presentation. Fact sheets and other information regarding hazardous waste topics, including the ones discussed in this presentation, may be found at the following links. Or you may call us, the Industrial Hazardous Waste Branch, via telephone at 334-270-5637. Thank you and have a good day.